Thank you so much. Please, a round of applause for the wonderful lady. Good evening. Mko fiti? Goda. Nice, okay. The last one was the real trick question. That was the vibe check. It's wonderful to see you. Naitwa Ngartia, as it was said. And it's always weird hearing your bio being read out. So I'm here to read a story for you guys. The people crossing the stage and sitting with me are my friends. Please give a round of applause for them. Thank you. I'll come back to my friends. I tell stories, especially centering Kenyan history. And the first time I saw the form in which I tell stories being performed was on this stage in 2012 by Ogutu Moraya. And so between then and now, things have happened. And Alliance, Deno and I have made it a bit of a small tradition for me to read stories out here for the first time before they go out to the rest of the world. So please be kind, because you're the first people to hear this story. And incidentally, you'll be hearing it for the first time along with my friends, the musicians, because I dragged them here by force. They're my friends, but they didn't buy me anything for my birthday, so I was like, this is how you pay for it. So please extend your grace. They're also hearing the story for the first time, except maybe for Vinny. He was raised by the MauMau and babysat by the Mongiki, so he knows the songs. We expect him to know the songs. All right. So can we get into it? Yeah. All right. So a little, I'm sorry. I thought they weren't done, so I was trying to buy time, but still, it's necessary. A bit of a trigger warning. It's a story from Kenya in the 1950s during the fight for independence. So there is quite a bit of violence and other triggering and disturbing material. Vinny, take it away with the anthem.
Gai mwega mutakiri waita mwamukiri magogo na madoiro Gai uri bere totike otonetho mwene nyaga twakuhoya tuhoyaga wendani na gitio Nada nyingi cia wendo wa bũrũri Ngai ũrĩ mbere tũtingĩhotwo nĩ thũ mwene nyaga twakũhoya tũhoyaga tũkonana tũiothe kuma Ngong'u nginya Kare matũũra hĩndĩ ĩyo kĩhane gĩgathira ciana ciaitũ na aciari aitũ kamatimũ mũrũagĩra kombo njamba cia ita ikĩrũĩra bũrũri twatigĩirwo nĩ Gĩkũyũ na Mũmbi mwene nyaga twakuhoya
Kathikĩrĩriai ndĩmũririkanie historĩ ya mbara ya rũĩ rũirũ nĩ wa Gatonye ũramũtarĩria na njĩra nguhĩ wega mũrĩega agitĩri a Kĩrĩnyaga tegai matũ mũigue kĩanginyanio nĩ njũru
inyuĩ anake mũiguane na aciari anyu na muona thĩna mũtikorie na thutha no inyuĩ mũgakena ningĩ o rĩngĩ inyuĩ anake nĩtũkwenda mũmenye biũ no mĩrĩkie gũtigana no ngoro itwarane hamwe.
In early 1952, Mzee Mararo Matube's eldest son started behaving strangely in 3 specific ways. You see, he worked in Nairobi, employed by the King's African Rifles, the KAR, and often he would come back home to Kamwiro village with lots of gifts, nice Nairobi things. Everyone looked forward to these visits, which had not changed for the 5 years that he had worked at KAR, until they changed, all of a sudden. The first switch was time. Kifara showed up and announced one night, much to everyone's surprise. He explained that the vehicle which had been ferrying him and his fellow KAR workers up country had broken down on the way, and as a result, they had been forced to walk a long way, hence his late night arrival. It was a reasonable explanation, and no one smelled any rat. Well, not on that occasion at least. But 2 or 3 strange night visits with similar excuses just raised more than a couple of eyebrows, especially since they sparked a deeper concern throughout the homestead. He was best captured by Mzee Mararo Matube, his father, when he asked, "Hey, Moro, kai tuindo turea tuega utuire uturehagira kuma kia matawa tweku? Where are those nice Nairobi things you usually bring us?" The second change concerned his company. On these nocturnal visits, Kifarawa Mararo was now always accompanied by 2 men, and they were not known to the family. But they were not only unknown to the family, but they also spoke their Gikuyu with a peculiar accent, the Nyeri accent, which in Ndia stood out like 2 njahes in a plate of rice. And that, Kifara had started lecturing his father, Mzee Mararo, on matters agricultural and political. And Mzee Mararo was a bona fide elder, as wealthy as they come in the traditional Gikuyu sense. He had 3 wives, more than 10 children, and land. Not to mention innumerable heads of cow, goats, and sheep. I mean, no one got to such social status without a functional intellectual department above their shoulders, especially if one had acquired such wealth from services rendered to the community through the role of a Muruivia, a circumcision expert. He was in the circle of high-ranking elders with unquestionable knowledge in cultural matters and general life wisdom. So why would Kifara, all mid-20s of age, with only a single wife and a couple of kids, think he could advise him? Yet he did. And the 2 of them spent long hours of the night in Mararo's digira, with son lecturing father on how to use his land. Cash crops like coffee and tea, Kifara insisted, were unwise. It is better to plant subsistence crops like potatoes, beans, and maize. Those could be consumed by the homestead, unlike the cash crops, which were controlled by forces that were beyond Mararo's reach. The colonial forces, to be exact. He pressed on. There's no difference between this type of farming and slavery. And speaking of which, I mean, even the land on which they were farming the cash crops would soon be reallocated once, freedom was achieved.
The fresh, ethical, equal distribution of land by a new independent government would render useless a lot of the work already put in the plots that they already currently had. So why put so much effort on property that would later belong to someone else? Kifara argued that all the people needed to do at this moment was establish and maintain all kinds of civil disobedience against the British colonial administration. Mzee Mararo dismissed his son. All these strange ideas were adolescent nonsense, he said. I mean, why had he picked them up anyways? You know young people, right? Liable to go mad on occasion. The old man knew a few things. He knew his crops flourished, his flocks were expanding, and his granaries were full, close to bursting with surplus. And born in 1889, just as the Europeans started invading Gikuyu country and establishing their presence, the terrible Ngartia had happened during Mzee Mararo's childhood, and the decades that followed were unprecedented. Mzee Mararo had seen their entire world change in their lifetime. The old way of life had peeled off like a snake's skin to leave this new, strange world, and it was changing too. He knew what had happened to those who had tried to resist the transformation, especially European encroachment. He knew what the community had to go through to recreate a sense of stability, and he knew they were here to stay. And therein lay the rub. What Kifara had not revealed to his father or his family, though some of his siblings had started suspecting it, was his recent activities. He held those ideas because he was involved deeply in the political discourse blazing across the land. He no longer brought them Nairobi gifts because he no longer worked in Nairobi. In 1952, he had quit his job at the KAR, gone into the Mount Kenya forest, taken the Batuni oath, and joined the main fighting force of the Kenya Land and Freedom Army, KLFA, famously known as MauMau. And he was pretty high-ranking, in fact, a brigadier. Those two men with Nyeri accents were his bodyguards.
Andũ aitũ tũrĩ ithuothe nĩ tũnyitane hamwe na tũtige mũthutũkanio. Bũrũri ũyũ nakĩrwo nĩrĩo igai ritũ, Ngai ũtũrĩrĩrie irathimo. Wĩyathi na ithaka, wĩyathi bũrũri wa Kĩrĩnyaga. Bũrũri wa gĩkeno ũrĩ itũbana mĩtitũ, Kenya nĩ bũrũri wa andũ aitũ. Tũtiũragio kũnyitwo ĩnio nakuo, kana icigĩrĩra, tondũ tũtigatiga gũtetera wĩyathi nginya bũrũri ũkona ũtheri. Wĩyathi na ithaka, wĩyathi bũrũri wa Kĩrĩnyaga. Bũrũri wa gĩkeno rĩitwamba na mĩtitũ, Kenya nĩ bũrũri wa andũ aitũ.
In 1953 in Ndia, especially the area around Kamwiro, things were on fire, literally. The region had been slow in picking up the militant resistance embodied by the rest of the land, especially the land occupied by the Gikuyu, the Embu, and the Meru. The popular freedom movement, dubbed MauMau by those who neither knew it nor understood it, had been banned in the colony of Kenya since 1950, thanks to the subsidiary legislation number 913 of 12 August 1950. That did not check its growth. The proclamation of the state of emergency in October of 1952, following the roadside killing of senior chief Waruhio Wakongo and the subsequent mass arrest of leaders, seemed to fuel the militant movement more. It spread its tendrils across the mountain, and soon it had erupted into a blaze in Ndia. The flames found the house of an Anglican reverend at Mogaya called Johanna Jumbi. and left a pile of ashes behind. Along with it was a blaze-consuming Kaduri Primary School across the village. Academic fires seemed to be in vogue since another attempted to consume Kamoiro Primary School. That last one was unsuccessful, but it made its point. There was no big mystery concerning the people behind the campaign of lighting up the symbols of westernization, specifically targeting members of a church headed by the monarchy of England. The people responsible were freedom fighters. They made their identity clear when they descended upon Mutira Anglican Church, took the church records, gathered medicines from the dispensary, and then swept into the house of Reuben Kenyua. Kenyua was a pioneer nurse and a lab technician. They dragged him out of his house, set up an impromptu court outside, and tried him in full view of his family. Reuben Kenyua stood accused of selling out, refusing to take the oath of unity, and worst of all, denying freedom fighters treatment at the dispensary. He was found guilty and sentenced to death. They shot him, then slashed his belly open as a warning to others of his ilk.
Maria mwedajero imenyaga inagoro kegatake gatithiraga Worori uyu ni witu no urio igai ritu twatigirwo ni mwene nyaga Weathi na ithaka weathi bũrũri wa Kĩrĩnyaga bũrũri wa gĩkeno rĩitwamba na mĩtitũ Ngai rathima bũrũri ũyũ.
Things were hot and deadly. However, it was when the fighters attacked Mutito chief's camp that the river broke its banks. They were looking for the colonial chief responsible for enforcing British oppression against his own people in the locality. His name was Stephen Gige wa Mashere. And it was his lucky day. He escaped by a hairbreadth. They may not have found him, but the fighters found treasure. The chief's camps during the emergency period were turned into home guard and police stations. And this one was no different. The armory was full of guns and ammunition, and the freedom fighters helped themselves to as much of the stash as they could carry, left Mutito, and disappeared into the forest. That's a pun for Kikuyus. They left Mutito and disappeared into the forest. With Senior Chief Waruhiwa Kongo Kongo's killing fresh on everyone's mind, that attack shook Chief Stephen Gige wa Mashere to the core. He swore revenge, especially declaring that he would kill the person leading the platoon responsible for the series of attacks in the region. It was said that that particular freedom fighter had also sworn to strike the chief dead on sight. It was only a matter of when and where. It was also said that the fearless fighter who dared lead such bold attacks was familiar to and with the area, that he was born and raised in Ndia, in Kamoiro village to be exact. It was said that along with his siblings, he had attended Sunday school at Emmanuel Anglican Church, Mutira, which was headed by Reverend Canon Johanna Jombi, whose house the freedom fighters burnt down. It was said that the Reverend's own brother, Paul Kagi, had taught catechism to the children, including the fighter, that though he did not finish the catechism classes, he had gone around the village with the other kids singing on Christmas Eve. It was said that though he never got baptized, he attended Anglican-sponsored schools, such as the same Mutira Mission School, Kaduri Primary School, which, again, they would later burn to the ground, and Mutito Primary School, located in the same area. Those with enough courage to attach certainty to the rumors even mentioned his name. The fearless fighter leading their troops on the march to freedom was none other than Kefara wa Mararo, now known as General Chui. It was true that Kefara had attended all those schools, that the Church of England had pulled him into its nest of Christianity as it had done to Africans during that time. It was also true that he was not crazy about the oppressor's religion. Raised in a homestead headed by Mararo Matube, an elder steeped deep in Gikuyu religious heritage, he saw no need to convert as he grew older. It didn't make sense to him. Plus, he thought he was a smart kid in school, starting his education with nursery school in Kaduri all the way to Mutito, where he sat his common entrance exam in class 4. He passed well enough to enroll for upper primary, and the classes went up to class 8. But at class 6, Kifara decided he'd had enough. I think all of us in class 6 would relate. After initiation in October of 1945, Kivara and his homie dropped out of school. He was now a man, and it was time for manly things, like getting a job at a manly place, like the army, so the KAR. It was right at the end of the Second World War. The army was the in thing. Kifara's schooling might have ended, but his education did not. Working for the army, he paid close attention. He learned about African politics. Many Africans who had been in the front lines during World War II came back home with expanded political consciousness. He learned military techniques, and importantly, he learned how to craft homemade guns. These guns would later be nicknamed Gatua Ohoro, the arbiter or the decider. Pay attention to the name Gatua Ohoro, it's going to come back again. The Second World War was a melting pot for Africans. Soldiers from Kenya met and mingled with those of multiple territories below the Sahara, all sharing the misfortune of being colonies. Uganda, Nigeria, Sudan, Sierra Leone, Tanganyika, which was the Tanzanian mainland then. I'm not sure if I still have you guys. Do I still have you guys? Okay. Oh, fantastic. Okay, so let's try a simple test. I'm going to say an old name for a country, and you guys say what it's currently named, okay? All right, fantastic. Let's try. Gold Coast. Hey, fantastic. Nyasaland. I see the doubt. The doubt is Malawi. Okay. Northern Rhodesia. Southern Rhodesia. Oh my God. It's the other way around. It's northern is Zambia and southern is Zimbabwe. If we have anyone from the mountain here, please say Zimbabwe. That's all I've been rehearsing, by the way, just to be able to say that one word. Can we keep going? All right. There were over 100,000 Africans, many of them determined to go back home and free their lands from the shackles of colonialism. And as they fought in the ranks of the KRA in the East African campaign, defeating Italians, they spread these ideas of liberation. And later on, when they were transferred to Burma or Burma, depending on which school you went to, and Malay, they made their plans concrete, hardening their resolve. This would be the last fight they were fighting for the Europeans. The next would be against them.
Kiugo kia mwisho na inyua nake o mundu niathie kwao mucii ageithie aria nyina na nyina ona ageithie ithe na gikeno.
For 5 years, Kifara worked for KAR. For 5 years, he absorbed all he could. For 5 years, he visited home, bringing gifts from Nairobi, and for 5 years, he bore the brunt of discrimination and inequality. Kifara learned that there was a social hierarchy. At the top was the white person, followed by the Asian and the Arab, and then finally, the black African. He realized that it did not matter whether it was on his own people's land. He was treated as inferior. It did not matter whether he had the same job description as the Asian, Arab, or European, he would be paid way less. It did not matter what his age was or whether he had gone through the rites of passage that declared him an adult. He would always be referred to as boy, among a selection of demeaning terms. These hard lessons grated and pained Kifara. He hoped that one day a chance would come to set things right. And he knew that it had not always been so. His own father had been born in an era, a dying era for sure, but one where Africans were masters of their own selves, destinies, and land. The chance he hoped for soon presented itself. a movement rallying people to unite around the demand for Weyathi Naithaka, freedom and land. He took the first oath and swore solidarity with the people, becoming a member of the movement. Then, in 1952, he took the Batuni Platoon oath. This oath was only taken by those who would actually take up arms and actively fight against the colonial system. It meant that one had consecrated their life to the cause of liberating the people and the land. Kifarawa Mararo resigned from his position in KAR, headed straight to Kirenyaga Forest, and joined a platoon under either General Roy or Odero. We're still trying to figure it out. And soon, he had risen to the position of brigadier. To his family, Kifara, Mzee Mararo's eldest son, started acting strangely. Now you see, back in the KAR, Kifara had learned that after the war, many soldiers returned with heavy expectations. The British had promised them generous rewards for risking their lives for the king. Sure, there were rewards, immense swaths of land, only they were granted to the white soldiers exclusively. Africans got a package, for sure. It had a sword, a belt, a hat, 2 blankets, and a very heavy raincoat. They were then sent on their way with a stern warning to not cause trouble and a reminder to pay taxes. Is that familiar? Right. To get money for the taxman, they had to work in the farms now occupied by the white ex-soldiers. And to make matters even more painful, many of the African soldiers were not only homeless, but were forced out of their ancestral land so that those specific Europeans could grab it. And they remembered how different things had been on the battlefield. Somehow, in the heat of war, they had been equal. Somehow, the British had found the capacity to share the same meals, water, and tea with the Africans. They somehow conveniently forgot the ideas of superiority. Under heavy artillery fire, human emotions, it turned out, were similar. The white soldiers wept, screamed, and shot themselves like everyone else did. As the veterans from Meru would later say, we peeped through the windows of the earth and realized that the white person is not God. They had, in fighting the war, realized that it had been a pose all along. They were actually very vulnerable and pitiful. And Africans never forgot this. They came back ready to change things, confident that they had the capacity. So when the freedom movement turned into a guerrilla warfare, these World War II veterans were the preferred fighters. They knew how to handle weapons, they understood military tactics, they had a deep resolve and no longer respected or feared the enemy. They had seen enough of them fall dead from bullets, and they knew more could. The World War II veterans joined the freedom movement en masse. Once the state of emergency was declared, many had to go into the forest. It was a premature start to the war. Things were not tidy. Organization and preparation was not yet at ideal levels, but that did not matter. It was now kahida kahide meruka, as the Gikuyu say, time to swallow the bone. Life in the forest was difficult. Heavy rainfall in Mount Kenya and Nyandarua forest kept them cold and drenched. Supplies were low. Basic things like a change of clothes were non-existent. The clothes dried on the body, then one kept moving. Talk of drip. With no shoes, they marched on cracked and blistered bare feet. Hunger was a constant companion, and those left in the village and reserves organized supply chains at first. But the enemy broke and disrupted them. On one end, getting the food into the forest became a life-threatening affair, requiring extensive planning, cooperation, and stealth. On the other hand, food itself became a problem. The British were using starvation as a weapon against the population. To stay alive, the freedom fighters depended on wild fruits, honey, herbs, and wild game, including monkeys. Still, they faced that well-fed, well-armed army, holding on to pangas, spears, clubs, homemade guns, and an occasional rifle or pistol. They went against machine guns, artillery, and grenades. The British Air Force dropped bombs from Lancaster bombers. The fighters called these planes Nyagekonyo. Some, however, perfected bringing them down. As the song that none of us will sing goes, Bisha eo urone komete na gara nea ndugu mũrũ wa gĩcerũ nĩwe ũharũrũkagia ndege igĩthiĩ kũnyarira itungati. The picture you see slanting to one side belongs to Dugu, the son of Gisheru. He's the one who brings down the bombing planes when they go to torture our warriors. Their biggest weapons were unity through the oath and faith in their sacred mission. The difficult life in the forest got too many fighters. Some asked out, and their comrades escorted them out. Others surrendered. Some were captured. Several, to save their skins or through torture, betrayed the cause, revealing secrets and pointing out the forest camps. Sometimes when you focus on something, it has the unexpected result. Like if you try and make life difficult for people, sometimes it makes them even more resolved to attain their goal. Such was the case for the residents of Ndia and Kamwiro village.
O Kamorata, twaranirie, tũrĩ na kĩeha, nĩ ũndũ wa ciana, bũrũri witũ, thire nduma.
Both Kifara and Chief Stephen came from Kamwiro village. The war had pushed them farther across the ideological schism, while some, like the chief and the home guards, cuddled even closer to their European masters, carrying out the most inhumane torture against their own. The people's support for their struggle grew. By August of 1954, the majority of Kamwiro's residents had taken the oath. The philosophies and the ideas of the so-called MauMau had spread and were now understood. Only a few home guards and loyalists were left on the colonial side in Kamwiro and the rest of Ndia, to be honest. Their ranks were split too, with up to 75% of the headmen known to be in support of the freedom fighters. Everyone else was in support of the fighters under the command of General Ndia in the area, plus fully behind other brigadiers who split and canvassed the entire territory in large battalions ranging from 20 to 90 members each. One of the most effective among these battalions was the one Kifara belonged to. By 1956, the outgoing district officer, an imperialist by the name of Major Wainwright, wrote a handover report to his incoming replacement, a man by the name of E.D. Gordon. He termed Kifara as the toughest guerrilla in the area, and he lamented having subjected the villagers to any and every punishment he could conceive, but he still supported the freedom fighters. And this punishment was not an understatement. Even Mzee Mararo wa Matube had eventually understood and the concepts his son had tried to explain to him. His initial dismissal turned into ardent support. He channeled whatever money and food he could get to the fighters in the forest, all while keeping it low-key to avoid detection. It didn't work for long. One of the whispers that his son's position within the Revolutionary Army was important spread. The colonial machinery soon landed on him and his family. It arrived teeth bared at Mzee Mararo's doorstep in 1954. The home guards and soldiers broke down doors, terrorizing everyone in sight. They grabbed Mzee Mararo, roughed him up, then threw him in chains. He was under arrest for supporting the independence movement. The women and children in the homestead gathered to watch and to appeal for his release, but things only got worse. The colonial agents identified Kifara's mother, Mrs. Damaris Wajiko Mararo. She was known in her younger days as the daughter of Deliwa Kifara, after whom her brave son was named. Next, they grabbed Gladys Wainoi, Kifara's wife, and their two children, Kenyua and Moai, who were made to listen as their mother and grandmother screamed from the torture. Kifara's mother, Damaris Wajiko, was arrested for the crime of bearing a bad child. Colonial detectives hit her with the butts of their rifles so hard on her breasts, which they insisted she had used to suckle the freedom fighter, that they caused severe medical complications for close to 50 years afterwards, eventually leading to her death on 3rd May 2003. The family was thrown into detention, with Mzee Mararo deported to Manyani concentration camp, then to Embakasi, as part of the forced labor that built that airport that was about to be sold.
Andũ aitũ tũrĩ ithuothe nĩ tũnyitane hamwe na tũtige mũthutũkanio. Bũrũri ũyũ nĩ witũ na nĩrĩo igai ritũ. Ngai ũturĩrie irathimo. Wĩyathi na ithaka, wĩyathi bũrũri wa Kĩrĩnyaga. Bũrũri wa gĩkeno rĩtwamba na mĩtitũ. Kenya nĩ bũrũri wa ndũirũ.
Meanwhile, Kifara had become a household name, thanks to his brave exploits in the battlefield, including one of the most pivotal episodes in the entire war, which has been immortalized in songs and stories as Bara ya Ruiruiru, the Black River Battle.
Kwarĩ mũthenya wa kerĩ itwarĩ itũra Karuthi, tũgĩthugunda meciria twaigua tũrĩa kabĩre. Tũgĩthugunda meciria twaigua tũrĩa kabĩre.
It was a Tuesday and we were in the village of Karuthi, racking our brains because we just heard that we'd been surrounded.
Twaigua ũguo nĩ twamakire tondũ twaimĩte gũthiĩ rũgendo rwa thikũ ithatũ na tũtiahurũkaga. Rũgendo rwa thikũ ithatũ no tũtiahurũkaga.
Hearing that scared us because we'd come from Aguthi, a 3-day journey, and we had not rested.
Mũtumia ũmwakire na riboti na ndubia, agĩtwĩra ciana ciakwa gũkũ nĩ gũthukire. Agĩtwĩra ciana ciakwa gũkũ nĩ gũthukire.
One lady came holding sugarless tea and a report, or a lady came holding tea and spilling the tea, if you may. And she told us, "My children, huku kumeharibika."
Tukĩmwĩra ũmĩrĩria twĩ haha njamba cia ita, rithathi marigũ thĩiniĩ ciatuthaga macoya. Rithathi marigũ thĩiniĩ ciatuthaga macoya.
So we told her to persevere because we were there and we were the warriors. Though bullets at that moment were shredding through the banana leaves.
Ũraga gatuoro magakomerera, makahũra kĩmũnũka ithuothe tũgagĩkaba. Makahũra kĩmũnũka ithuothe tũgakaba.
The enemy would fire their machine guns and we would take cover. And we would fire Gatuohoro, remember it? And they would also take cover.
Na hĩndĩ ĩyo tũgĩkaba hakuhĩ na mũgumo, Longia kĩhũra bebeta burujie kĩgĩ igũrũ. Longwa kĩhũra bebeta burujie kĩgĩ igũrũ.
At that time, we were stationed near the Mugumo tree, and Long fired with a submachine gun and filled the air with gunpowder smoke is the closest translation here.
Chui nĩwe warĩ mĩnja mũrũithia wa mbara, agĩtongoria mĩrano ĩgĩkĩra rũthangatĩ. Agĩtongoria mĩrano ĩgĩkĩra rũthangatĩ.
Chui was the one who was the major leading the battle, and he led the warriors until they crossed River Ruragati.
Na twakinya hau kĩangĩ tũgĩkora ciakaba, andũ othe makĩũmĩrĩria tũgĩcitambũrithia, andũ othe makĩũmĩrĩria tũgĩcitambũrithia.
And when we got to Kiangi, we found an undercover ambush. Everyone persevered and we made ourselves known.
Sidareli igaruke mi thirikari ĩkĩmaka, maugaga nĩwe njenũrũ akũrũithia mbara, maugaga nĩwe njenũrũ akũrũithia mbara.
Shidereli ululated so loud. Shidereli is a female MauMau fighter known as Wajikogakuru in real life. She said Shidereli ululated so loud that the enemy thought that she was the general leading the battle.
KLFA kiuga cagũra iyo mũthũngũ, mũtige mbarĩ nyakairũ nĩ ũrimũ marĩ naguo, mũtige mbarĩ nyakairũ nĩ ũrimũ marĩ naguo.
General KLFA said an important thing. He commanded his soldiers to choose and pick only the white soldiers and spare the black brothers because they were just being fueled by stupidity.
Thirikari arĩ nyingĩ arutĩtwo na nyuki, nerĩngĩ atumutumu nerĩngĩ karatina, nerĩngĩ atumutumu nerĩngĩ karatina.
The government forces were many. They'd been brought from Nanyuki, some had been brought from Karatina, and others had been brought from Tomotomo.
Bongo nyingĩ nĩciorire cionete kĩa macini, koguo ciaragia ciĩtanage na nyuki, koguo ciaragia ũva ciĩtanage na nyuki.
A lot of the white officers ran towards Kiamashini, and when they got there, they were trying to call for help through their walkie-talkies, reaching Nanyuki.
Mũthikĩrĩria wa ova nake akĩmacokeria nguru.
The radio operator would then respond and would tell them, keep on fighting, the soldiers who were there. Sisi uko atukuji.
Neti twarĩ nacio na tũtiahũthagĩra, mbembe twarĩ na nyingĩ raibũ itangĩtarĩka, nguruneti twarĩ nacio no tũtiahũthagĩra.
We had grenades, so many of them that we were not even using them. And we had some machine guns as well. And we had so many rifles that no one could count them.
Gaterua orirori thathi caba ya kĩande, Chui akĩrakara mũno agĩkĩrekia na ngara, Chui akĩrakara mũno agĩkĩrekia na ngara.
And the highlight was of the battle was when one of the warriors was shot in the shoulder. And Chui, Mararo, got so angry that he actually started wrestling the British officer leading the other side of the forces. It had been a stressful 4 years, the most difficult period of his career, and definitely the most trying of his life. Yet, on this day, on May 1956, Chief Stephen Gige Mashere was in great spirits, extravagant, even, one might say, both with the orders he issued and their content. You see, one of the decrees was for the fetching of a Land Rover, mounted with the best public address system available. Behind the microphone would be the most articulate and audible announcer in the locality. The vehicle was to have enough fuel to reach all the nooks of Kamoiro village and the vicinity, under the control of a driver who knew his way around. All this, of course, were costly undertakings during the war period, but Chief Stephen did not care. This was his day. The second decree concerned what the announcer would be broadcasting through that public address system. Every woman in the area was to collect firewood and ferry it to a designated spot immediately, or else. Alama ya dukuduku. The threat needed no further expounding. The colonial administration that the chief was part of had meted enough punishment of the people for them to fill in the blanks. In fact, the chief clarified to his announcer, almost dancing with glee, he wanted the message delivered with the following addendum. Okay? Since the women were stubborn and would definitely want to know what their labor was being exploited for. Yes, that's right, women, right? Yeah, it's only right to know, right? Yeah, so even though they had no option to obey, the chief still wanted the announcer to declare a feast. He was to call for the women to bring their firewood so they would roast their ram. He had a special treat for them. And what's a feast without slaughter? So the announcer got on the Land Rover, and the driver navigated the entire region. All women, the chief orders you to bring firewood so you can roast your ram, he announced. The women of Kamuiro, puzzled and worried, but with no intention of putting their families or themselves in further trouble, gathered the required wood and assembled at the appointed place. The armed home guards present forced them to pile it up high on a flat spot. That's when another Land Rover arrived. It had the letters OHMS emblazoned across the bumper on His Majesty's service, on Her Majesty's service. It was surrounded by a platoon of heavily armed men. And as the women watched, this second Land Rover pulled up. They could hear the first one doing its rounds still, urging women, the bearers of bad children, it said, as the chief had called them, to hurry up and bring their firewood. A feast had been prepared for them. That insult cut deep. As the Gikuyu proverb goes, no one desires troublesome offspring. And the women were no fools. They knew there was no literal feast. The chief could not have suddenly turned benevolent. They showed up, though. They had no option. And a morbid curiosity gripped them. In front of them, the OHMS Land Rover stopped, surrounded by soldiers, police, and home guards. Some of the armed men lifted something from the Land Rover's back. They carried it towards the pile of firewood. A woman yelled out, "Guy!" in shock. And another one joined in with a hollow voice dripping with pain. The exclamations stirred the crowd. They moved closer for a better look, terrified of what their eyes would fall on. Muttering murmurs and whispers shuffled through their ranks. Speculations, answers, and confirmations buzzed right back. From mouth to ear, the mothers, sisters, and daughters held themselves in collective disbelief. A shared fear stretched taut, like a string holding too much weight, waiting to snap. A roof about to cave in, inevitable. No way, no. It couldn't be. Not now, not here, not him. But yes, it was true. It was happening right there in front of them. It was him that the British were placing on the pile of firewood. It was him that they were lighting on fire. It was him that they forced them to watch as his entire body burned to ashes. It was still him when the colonial officers beat up anyone who tried to flee the scene. It was still him when they beat up anyone who tried to weep or moan or cry. It was still him when they forced the villagers who had raised, lived, and grown with Kifarawa Mararo to pick up their hoes, to pick up their jembes, and dig up that spot until all the ashes were mixed up with the soil. It sure looked like him all through that. But how could it be? Right there in front of them, how could it be? A short while before, these brutal forces had paraded someone else, claiming that it was him, but he had turned out to be a lookalike. Was he not invisible? Wasn't General Chui invisible? Swear, usually they could not have gotten him after all this time. Not him, not the leopard, of Ndia.
Tutiũragia kũnyitwo ĩnona kwona ũthamio kana gũtwarwo icigĩrĩra tondũ tũtigatiga gũtetera wĩyathi nginya bũrũri ũkona ũtheri wĩyathi na ithaka wĩyathi bũrũri wa Kĩrĩnyaga bũrũri wa gĩkeno rĩtwamba na mĩtitũ Kenya nĩ bũrũri wa andũ airũ kĩrathimo gĩa ciana ũtheremu wa bũrũri nĩ Ngai riumaga kũrĩ Ngai kĩrimũ na mũgĩ gĩtonga na mũthĩni muoroto witũ no wĩyathi wĩyathi na ithaka wĩyathi bũrũri wa Kĩrĩnyaga bũrũri wa gĩkeno rĩtwamba na mĩtitũ Kenya nĩ bũrũri wa andũ airũ maithe ma ciana athoria akau njamba cia bata cia bũrũri kaĩ mũtangĩikia maitho na mwĩyũrie na ngoro rĩu bũrũri ũrorete kũ wĩyathi na ithaka wĩyathi bũrũri wa Kĩrĩnyaga bũrũri wa gĩkeno rĩtwamba na mĩtitũ Kenya nĩ bũrũri wa andũ airũ.
Thank you.
Please, a round of applause for Vinny Goge. Timothy Arinaito on the guitar. And I swear this is his name, Bogwa, Bogwa, Bogwa. And one last one for all the freedom fighters that make sure that we can talk shit today. I lied. The last one is yours before we leave. Please, a round of applause for the audience. And thank you so much, Alliance, for having us. It's usually awkward. Usually we leave backstage. But now, before you leave, actually, this would be inappropriate if the last actual round of applause we all have is not for Butere girls, guys. So let's hear it for Butere girls. Thank you so much.